When I announced my pregnancy, my father-in-law said, "Abort it before you curse our family with a defective child." He said it at the head of the dinner table in front of everyone while my husband Daniel sat frozen beside me, staring down at his plate like the answer to all of this was hidden somewhere in the mashed potatoes. And his mother nodded along, slow and satisfied, like he'd said something wise. And I was still holding the ultrasound photos of our healthy 12-week baby. The little gray curve of a spine, the tiny bright flicker they'd told me was the heart. "Your family has that Down syndrome," Gerald said, swirling his wine like we were discussing a bad investment. "No child carrying the Whitmore name is going to be born damaged. My brother Eli has Down syndrome, and he is the kindest, most loving person I have ever known." But Gerald had never once looked at Eli as a person. He looked at him the way he looked at a scratch on his car, a flaw on a family tree he'd spent his whole life polishing to a shine. "There's no Down syndrome gene that runs in bloodlines like that," I told him, keeping my voice level. "It's almost always a random chromosomal change. It has nothing to do with my family." Gerald laughed, low and cold, the kind of laugh meant to make you feel stupid. "Don't insult my intelligence," he said. "Your brother has it. That makes you a carrier. It's simple biology. Daniel deserves a proper heir, not whatever broken thing you'll hand him." And then he reached across the table, plucked the ultrasound photos right out of my hands, and dropped them into the trash can beside his chair like they were used napkins. "These are worthless," he said, "until testing proves the child is normal, which it won't be, because you are not normal." I sat there for a second, unable to breathe, waiting for my husband to say something, anything. Daniel finally spoke, but not to me, and not to defend me. "Dad has a point," he said quietly. "Maybe we should just get the testing done, to be safe." I turned and looked at him like I'd never seen him before in my life. "Testing is fine, Daniel," I said, "but that's not what your father is saying. He's telling me to abort our baby based on family history that isn't even medically real." Gerald pushed his chair back and stood, buttoning his suit jacket like he was closing a board meeting. "I've looked into your people," he said, pacing behind the chairs. "Weak lungs, a brother who can't live on his own, a grandmother who died with nothing. You are diluting 3 generations of everything I have built. My family had one brother with Down syndrome and a grandmother who struggled with money," I said. "That's what he'd reduced us to. Your family isn't flawless either, Gerald. Your wife takes heart medication. Your daughter dropped out of college twice." He slammed his open hand flat on the table so hard the wine glasses jumped and rang. "Those are private family matters," he snapped. "What you are talking about is bringing a burden into this house, something that will drain the estate and embarrass the name for the rest of its natural life." He meant a child. He meant that a child who might have a disability was, to him, an embarrassment and an expense. "Any child of mine will be loved exactly as it is," I said, and my voice finally started to shake. "Regardless of ability, regardless of anything." Gerald turned to Daniel like I wasn't even in the room. "Do you hear how she talks?" he said. "She wants to chain you to a defective child. The medical bills, the institutions, the special schools, a lifetime of care while she stands there playing the saint. Is that the life you pictured for yourself?" Daniel looked queasy, gray around the mouth. "I mean," he mumbled, "if we can catch it early before it's too late." His mother Diane finally opened her mouth, and somehow her softness was worse than Gerald's cruelty. "No grandchild of ours can be born that way, sweetheart," she said gently, reaching over to pat my hand like she was doing me a kindness. "You have to think of the family. Think of what people would say. They'd say exactly what they already know," I answered, pulling my hand back. "That the Whitmores care more about their name than their own blood. People with Down syndrome are not defects, and they are not burdens. They are people. My brother is a person." Gerald smiled at me the way you'd smile at a slow child. "People," he repeated, "who can't hold a job, who can't live alone, who spend their entire lives drooling and mumbling and being wiped clean by someone else." Everything he said was false, every word of it, and it proved he knew absolutely nothing about the brother I loved or the baby I was carrying. I stood up to leave, and Gerald stepped directly into my path. "You are not going anywhere," he said, "until you agree to genetic testing and a termination if it comes to that." I stepped around him, my heart pounding. "I will test for my own peace of mind," I said. "I am not aborting a healthy baby because of your prejudice." He turned back to his son, his voice dropping to something flat and final. "Handle your wife, Daniel, or I will handle this myself. No defective heir is going to carry my name." Daniel wouldn't look at me. "Maybe we should just keep our options open," he said to the tablecloth. "Dad understands these things." "Your father is a bigot, Daniel," I said, and Diane gasped and pressed her fingers to her chest like I'd cursed in the middle of church. The next day, Diane showed up at our house with a stack of glossy pamphlets about termination fanned out in her manicured hands. "Your father-in-law arranged everything," she said in that gentle voice, as if gentleness could make any of it kinder. "The clinic is very discreet, very private. No one ever has to know about the defective pregnancy. I was 16 weeks along by then, and the baby was perfect, and I was so angry I could barely see straight. I am not ending a healthy pregnancy," I told her. She set the pamphlets down on my kitchen counter and smoothed them flat. "It isn't healthy if it came from you, dear," she said. "Your blood is tainted. Even if this one somehow turns out fine, the next one won't be." She had already decided, in her mind, that every child I would ever carry was suspect, defective, before it drew a breath. "Then, none of you will ever be part of any child I raise," I said. Diane picked her purse back up off the counter, unbothered. "Daniel will never choose you over his father," she said on her way to the door. "He knows exactly who signs the checks." That night, Daniel proved her right. "Maybe we should hold off on kids for now," he said, not looking up from his phone. "Dad's really shaken up about the genetic risk." I stood in front of him in our living room and looked at the man I had married. "Your father is wrong," I said. "Medically, scientifically, morally. In every single way a person can be wrong, he is wrong." Daniel kept scrolling. "It's not too late for other options," he said. So casually it turned my stomach. "Dad knows a doctor who would still take care of it. His father had gone and found someone willing to end a healthy pregnancy at 16 weeks for no medical reason at all, out of nothing but shame and pride." "You want me to abort our baby?" I said slowly, "because your father is ashamed of my brother?" Daniel got defensive fast, the way he always did when he knew he was wrong. "He's not ashamed. He's practical," he said. "If something's wrong with it, we're stuck with it forever. Something wrong with it." Our child had already become an it in my husband's mouth, an it that might be defective. That was the moment I knew. I went upstairs and packed a bag while Daniel sat on the couch and didn't move. He didn't follow me. He didn't try to stop me. He didn't say a single word until I was at the door. "Where will you even go?" he said, almost bored. "Who's going to want a single mother dragging around damaged kids?" I moved in with my parents that night, and when I told them about the baby, they cried, both of them, out of pure joy. My brother Eli, who has Down syndrome, spun in a full circle in the living room and announced at the top of his lungs that he was going to be the best uncle in the entire world. The divorce papers came faster than I expected, but the real story, the part I need you to hear, began the day I gave birth. My childhood bedroom looked almost exactly the way it had the day I left for college. The same glow-in-the-dark stars stuck crooked on the ceiling, the same faded band posters curling at the corners, my old desk still shoved up under the window. window. Mom had already cleared out half the closet and was unfolding a secondhand portable changing table in the corner before Dad had even finished carrying the last box in from my car. She moved fast, unpacking tiny sleepers and receiving blankets she must have bought within an hour of my phone call, folding each little thing twice and stacking them on the dresser with careful hands. Dad set down the last box, squeezed the back of my neck the way he used to when I was small and didn't have the words for what I was feeling, and said nothing at all, which somehow meant more than anything he could have said. I sat down on the edge of my old bed and watched my mother arrange impossibly small clothes on a dresser, and for the first time since that dinner in the Whitmore house, I did not feel like I was drowning completely alone. The doorbell rang around 7, and I heard Eli's voice downstairs, louder and higher and more excited than usual. He came pounding up the stairs 2 at a time with something tucked under his arm and a grin so wide his eyes nearly disappeared. He pulled out a stuffed gray elephant with a floppy trunk and a soft yellow bow tied around its neck. "For the baby," he said, pushing it into my hands before I could even stand up. "I bought it myself with my own money from work, and the lady at the store told me that elephants never forget their family." I looked down at the elephant and then up at my brother's hopeful shining face, and something in my chest that had been clenched into a fist for days finally quietly let go. I cried. The good kind of crying, the kind I hadn't done in what felt like years, while Eli hugged me carefully around the shoulders and patted my back like I was something fragile that might break in his hands. "You're going to be the best mom," he said into my hair, "and I'm going to be the best uncle." And I believed every single word out of his mouth. Daniel started calling the very next morning, before I was even fully awake. I watched his name light up the screen and let it ring straight through to voicemail, then pulled the blanket up over my head. He called again 20 minutes later, then again an hour after that. By the end of that first day, I had 8 missed calls stacked up on my phone. I finally sat down and listened to all the voicemails that night while Mom made dinner downstairs, and the smell of it drifted up through the vents. His voice was strained and tight, apologizing without ever actually apologizing for anything. "I know you're upset," he said in the first one, "but we can talk about all of this like reasonable adults. Dad's only looking out for our future, for both of us. Maybe things came out a little wrong at dinner." The second message was colder, more defensive. "You can't just walk out on a marriage," he said. "We need to sit down and discuss our options like grown-ups. I'm really trying here, but you're being completely impossible." By the third day, the tone had shifted yet again. "Dad thinks we should all sit down together as a family and clear the air," he said. "He wants to help us fix this. Can you please just call me back?" I deleted every message the second it finished playing, and with each one, the anger in my chest set a little harder, like cement, because not once in any of them did Daniel say that what he'd done was wrong. Not once did he take back calling our baby an it. Not once did he acknowledge that his father had told me to abort a healthy child. Every message somehow framed me as the unreasonable one, the hysterical one, the one overreacting to legitimate concerns instead of running for my life from genuine cruelty. The very last voicemail came on the 7th day. "Dad really wants to speak with you himself," he said. "He feels like there's been a big misunderstanding. Please, just hear him out." I blocked his number right there, sitting cross-legged on my childhood bed with Eli's stuffed elephant sitting in my lap, and I felt lighter the second I did it. The law office of Marsh and Reyes was on the 3rd floor of an old brick building downtown, and the waiting room smelled like paper and burnt coffee and floor polish. Naomi Reyes was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with dark hair pulled back tight and a calm, steady voice and a pair of eyes that seemed to take in everything at once and miss nothing. She let me tell the entire story from beginning to end without interrupting a single time, from the dinner table to the pamphlets on my counter to Daniel casually offering me his father's discreet doctor. I watched her expression change slowly as I talked, from professional and neutral to something hard and quietly furious underneath. "What they did to you is emotional abuse and coercion," she said when I finished, folding her hands together on top of her desk. "Your father-in-law's threats, your husband's manipulation, the whole family pressuring you to terminate a healthy, wanted pregnancy, that is a documented pattern of behavior, and family court judges do not forgive it." She pulled a yellow legal pad toward her and started writing. "The fact that your husband tried to write your child off before it was even born, over a disability it does not even have, that is going to matter enormously in front of a judge. We are going to file for full physical and full legal custody, with supervised visitation only, and we are going to make absolutely certain that Gerald Whitmore never gets anywhere near your child without a judge's explicit permission." She looked up at me. "You did the right thing walking out of that house," she said. "Now let me do my job and make sure you and your baby are protected." And for the first time in weeks, something tight and painful in my chest finally loosened its grip. 3 days later, Gerald showed up at my parents' house. I was upstairs resting when I heard the doorbell, and then Dad's voice coming up through the floorboards, harder and colder than I had ever heard it in my entire life. "You are not welcome here, Gerald," he said. "You need to leave, right now." Gerald's voice carried up through the window, smooth and entitled and utterly unbothered. "This is a family matter," he said. "I have every right to speak with the mother of my grandchild. She is not your family anymore," Dad said, "and neither is that baby. Now get off my porch." I heard the scrape of expensive shoes on the boards, Gerald trying to push his way past my father, and then Dad's voice dropped even lower, into pure ice. "I said leave," he said. "You are trespassing on my property." Mom was already standing in my bedroom doorway with her phone pressed to her ear, calmly and clearly giving the dispatcher our address while I sat frozen on the bed. The police arrived in under 10 minutes, and I watched from behind my curtain as 2 officers walked Gerald back toward his gleaming car while he lectured them the entire way about who he was, how much he paid in taxes, and how they'd regret this. He got into his car red-faced, and the officers stood on the porch talking to my parents and taking notes for another 20 minutes. The next morning, Dad drove down to the courthouse and filed for a restraining order, and the temporary order was granted that very same day. The ultrasound room was dim and cool, and the technician had angled the monitor so I could see the screen clearly from where I lay. I was 18 weeks along now, and the baby filled the whole screen, so much bigger than the little curve from 12 weeks, with a clearly defined head and body, and a spine and tiny perfect fingers I could actually count one by one. The technician moved the wand and measured and clicked, taking images from every angle, and her voice was warm the whole time. "The baby is developing beautifully," she said. "Every single measurement is right where it's supposed to be. Heart rate is perfect. I'm not seeing any signs of any abnormality at all." She showed me the 4 chambers of the heart pulsing away, and the curve of the spine, and the little bright shape of the brain. "Everything," she said, "looks completely healthy." Dr. Anita Sharma, who would become both my OB and later my daughter's pediatrician, came in afterward to go over the genetic screening results I'd done at 16 weeks. She was in her 50s, calm and precise, with reading glasses pushed up into her hair. "Your screening came back at very low risk for every chromosomal condition we test for," she said, sitting down beside the bed, "including Down syndrome." Then she looked directly at me. "I understand your husband's family has raised some some concerns about genetic inheritance, she said. I would like to explain to you clearly why what they've told you is medically inaccurate. And she went through it slowly, point by point. Down syndrome, she explained, is caused by a random error during cell division, an extra copy of a chromosome. It is not a gene that gets passed down through a family bloodline. Having a brother with Down syndrome does not make you a carrier of anything. It does not increase your risk at all. The condition your father-in-law described, she said, the hereditary curse he seems to believe in, simply does not exist in the way he thinks it does. She offered, without my even asking, to write a full and detailed letter from my lawyer documenting all of it. Sometimes, she said gently, people need to see it in writing from a doctor before they'll admit they were wrong. I'm very glad to give you that. Naomi called me 4 days after that ultrasound, and I could hear the tension in her voice before she even said why. Daniel's attorney just sent over the divorce terms, she said. You need to hear these. She read them to me over the phone, and I felt my face go hot and then cold. The papers demanded a paternity test before Daniel would agree to pay a single dollar in support. And then, buried in the middle of the document, there was a clause stating in plain legal language that Daniel would carry no financial responsibility whatsoever if the baby was born with a significant disability. They are actually trying to write themselves an escape hatch, Naomi said, based on your child's health. In all my years doing this is one of the ugliest, most insulting documents I have ever read. She was already drafting the counter motion as we spoke. We are including every bit of it, she said. The coercion, the trespassing, the offer to arrange a late-term termination, the abandonment when you were 4 months pregnant. We are going to fight for full custody and substantial support, and we are going to build a complete picture of who this family really is. She paused. Judges, she said, do not look kindly on a father who tries to opt out of supporting his own child based on a health condition. This clause is going to work against him more than anything else in the entire case. This shows the court exactly who Daniel Whitmore is. Dr. Lena Brooks's therapy office was on the ground floor of a converted old house, with soft lamps and comfortable chairs that didn't feel clinical at all. I booked myself in twice a week because I couldn't sleep, couldn't stop replaying that dinner scene on a loop behind my eyes, couldn't stop hearing Gerald's voice calling my child a defect. In the very first session, I cried for almost 45 minutes straight while Dr. Brooks handed me tissues and simply listened. Your grief is valid, she told me when I finally slowed down. You are mourning the husband you thought you had married and discovering that he is someone else entirely underneath, someone who only shows up when there's pressure. She helped me understand, over those first weeks, that Daniel's silence at that table was not some flaw I could have fixed if I'd only been more patient or loved him a little harder. This is who he actually is, she said. His cruelty didn't come out of nowhere under stress. It revealed his real character. People show you who they are in a crisis, and your husband showed you very clearly. She never once let me shrink what had happened, or make excuses for him, or wonder aloud if I'd overreacted. He chose his father's approval over your child's life, she said. That is not something you caused, and it is not something you could have prevented. That was his choice, and it tells you everything you need to know about him. By the end of the second week, I was sleeping through most of the night again, eating regular meals again, and slowly starting to accept that the ending of my marriage was not my failure. It was his. Eli asked me at Sunday dinner, very seriously, if he could please come to my next ultrasound appointment. I want to see the baby move on the screen, he said. I want to see my niece or my nephew. My parents exchanged a look across the table, and I realized both of them were tearing up. Of course you can come, I told him. I would love that more than anything. The 20-week ultrasound was scheduled for the following Tuesday, and Eli took the whole morning off from his job at the grocery store, where he bags groceries and helps stock the shelves and knows every regular customer by name. He sat in the chair right next to the exam table, leaning so far forward to see the monitor that the technician laughed and asked him to lean back just a little. There's the baby, she said, moving the wand. You can see the head right here, and the body, and look, the baby is moving. Eli gasped like he just witnessed a genuine miracle. The baby kicked on screen, and he grabbed my hand and squeezed it. Did you see that? He whispered. Did you see it kick? He asked her 100 questions, one after another. What's that part? Is that the heart? How big is the baby right now? Can the baby hear us talking? And the technician answered every single one patiently, turning the screen and pointing things out. Can I please have some copies of the pictures? He asked. I want to keep them in my wallet to show people. She printed him a whole extra set, and he held them like they were made of gold. I'm going to be the best uncle in the world, he told the baby, leaning down close to my belly. I'm going to teach you everything I know. By the time we left, the technician was wiping tears from the corners of her own eyes. The certified letter arrived at my parents' house 6 days after the restraining order was issued. Mom carried it upstairs to my room with a worried look on her face. It's from Gerald, she said. I opened it carefully, already knowing that the very existence of it was a violation. Inside were 20 pages of printed articles about genetic testing and prenatal screening and termination procedures, with whole sections highlighted in aggressive yellow and notes scrawled in the margins in Gerald's hard, angular block letters. See, this proves the risk is hereditary, one note said. Testing is essential. Termination is medically justified in these cases, said another. But none of the articles actually said what he claimed they said. Most of them came from questionable websites, and the few legitimate medical sources he'd included directly contradicted his interpretation. One of them stated, in plain black and white, that Down syndrome is not inherited down family lines. I photographed every single page and sent them all to Naomi. She called me back within the hour, her voice sharp. This is a clear, blatant violation of the restraining order, she said. He is not allowed to contact you in any way, and he mailed a certified letter directly to your home address. I am adding this to the file and notifying the court first thing tomorrow. 2 days later, the judge reviewed the violation and extended the restraining order for another full year, with a warning that any further contact would result in jail time. Naomi told me afterward that Gerald had actually tried to argue he was only sharing important medical information, and that the judge had shut him down flat. No contact means no contact, the judge told him. Consider this your final warning. The prenatal class met every Thursday evening in a conference room at the hospital, with folding chairs arranged in a loose circle and a relentlessly cheerful instructor named Sandra. I walked in that first night feeling nervous and exposed, the only person there completely alone, until I noticed one other person sitting off to the side by himself, looking every bit as uncomfortable and out of place as I felt. His name was Owen, and during Sandra's opening icebreaker, we ended up paired together. My wife left me while she was pregnant, he told me quietly, when it was our turn to share. We're getting divorced, but I still want to be there for my son, no matter what. It's complicated. I understood complicated better than anyone. We ended up as partners for every exercise that night, and the next week, and the one after that, trading stories about lawyers and family drama, and the strange, specific loneliness of preparing for a baby without the person who was supposed to be standing beside you. Owen had a dry, self-deprecating sense of humor that made me laugh out loud for the first time in weeks. At least we're not doing the alone part completely alone, he said, gesturing around at the circle of coupled up strangers. Even if we technically are alone, the class covered everything: labor positions and newborn care and breastfeeding basics, and having Owen there beside me as a friend made all of it feel less overwhelming. We exchanged numbers after the second class and started texting almost every day, sharing articles we found, asking each other questions about car seats and swaddles and which strange new symptom was normal, comparing notes on the nights neither of us could sleep. We're going to be okay, he told me one night after class, walking me out to my car in the dark parking lot. We're doing the work. We're learning what we need to know. Our kids are going to be just fine. And I wanted so badly to believe him. 3 weeks after Owen first walked me to my car, Daniel's lawyer sent an email to Naomi requesting a face-to-face meeting between Daniel and me, with both attorneys present. Naomi called me right away and asked very carefully whether I even wanted to consider it. She warned me that these meetings sometimes made things much worse instead of better. I thought about it for 2 full days before I called her back and said yes, because underneath everything, I needed to know whether any part of the man I had married still existed somewhere under his father's thumb. The meeting happened on a Thursday afternoon in a neutral conference room downtown, a building neither lawyer's office actually used. I got there 10 minutes early and sat in a hard plastic chair beside Naomi until Daniel arrived with his attorney, a sharp woman in her 50s. Daniel looked terrible, in a way that genuinely startled me. His suit hung loose off his shoulders like he'd lost 15 pounds, and his face had a grayish, sickly tone to it, with dark circles carved under both eyes like he hadn't slept properly in weeks. We all sat down on opposite sides of a long table under humming fluorescent lights, and for the first few minutes, Daniel just stared down at the tabletop while his lawyer walked through the purpose of the meeting. Then finally, he looked up at me. He started by saying he was sorry for how things had happened. His voice was quiet, and he kept his hands folded together in front of him like a schoolboy. I watched his face and I waited for him to say something real, something true. And then he added that his father had only been worried about him getting trapped in a difficult situation, and that maybe the two of us had both overreacted to a few strong words at a family dinner. The words landed on me like a bucket of ice water. It was not an apology for anything he had actually done. It was an apology for the outcome. He wasn't taking responsibility for calling our baby an it, or for offering me his father's abortion doctor, or for standing by while Gerald dropped my ultrasound photos in the trash. He was expressing regret that I had reacted badly to his family's reasonable concerns. I glanced sideways and saw Naomi's jaw tighten. Daniel kept going, talking about how stressful everything had been for him, how he'd never meant for things to get this bad, how maybe we'd both said things we didn't mean, how his father did, after all, have some valid points about genetic testing. And I felt something inside me go completely, permanently cold. This wasn't remorse. This was Daniel trying to rewrite the entire history of what had happened so that he could sleep better at night. Naomi asked his attorney coolly whether there was an actual proposal on the table they wanted to discuss. The lawyer glanced at Daniel, and then Daniel shifted in his chair and looked at me with an expression that I think was meant to seem sincere. He said he'd been doing a lot of thinking, and that the truth was, he didn't really want to be a father right now. The words came out slow and careful, like he was testing how they'd sound in the open air. His lawyer jumped in smoothly to say that Daniel recognized he simply wasn't ready for the responsibilities of parenthood, given his current circumstances. And then Daniel took a breath and asked if I would consider letting his parents adopt the baby. The entire conference room went dead silent. I sat there staring at him, unable to make my brain process the words I had just heard come out of my husband's mouth. He wanted me to give my child to Gerald, to the man who had called my baby a defect and demanded I abort it, to the man who had thrown my ultrasound photos in the trash and told me, to my face, that my blood was contaminated. Daniel kept talking, filling the awful silence. Something about how his parents had resources and experience and a stable home, and how it would honestly be better for everyone if the baby was raised by people who were truly ready, and how I could of course still be involved somehow, maybe visits. They could all work something out. I stood up so fast that my chair scraped loudly against the floor and nearly tipped over. Naomi put a steadying hand on my arm, but I pulled away from her and walked straight to the window, my hands shaking, my heart slamming against my ribs, my whole body vibrating with a rage I could not put into words. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of Daniel sitting there calmly suggesting I hand my daughter over to his monstrous father made it impossible for me to speak. Behind me, I heard Naomi's voice, cold and sharp and absolutely controlled, telling Daniel's lawyer that this meeting was over. "We are done negotiating anything beyond basic divorce terms and child support," she said. Daniel started to say something, but she cut him off completely. "If your client has decided he doesn't want to be a father," she said, "then he is welcome to sign away his parental rights entirely. But understand this clearly. There is no scenario, none in any possible world, where Gerald Whitmore will ever have custody of this child." I heard chairs scraping and papers being gathered, and then Naomi touched my shoulder gently and told me it was time to go. I walked out of that conference room without looking back at my husband even once. 2 days later, my old college friend Priya called me, and I could tell from her voice right away that she was uncomfortable. She said there was something she felt she had to tell me because she still moved in some of the same social circles as the Whitmore family. Gerald, she said, had been going around talking to people, at his country club, at his charity galas, at every dinner party that would have him, telling anyone who would listen that I was mentally unstable. In Gerald's version of the story, I was the one who had wanted the abortion, out of fear of raising a disabled child. And when Daniel had refused, I had made up horrible lies about his family to justify leaving him, and now I was trying to trap Daniel with a baby and squeeze money out of him while dragging the good Whitmore name through the mud. And the worst part, Priya said, was that most people seemed to believe him, because Gerald told the story so calmly, so sadly, so sympathetically, positioning himself as the heartbroken patriarch just trying to protect his son from a manipulative, unstable woman. The story was so perfectly, completely backwards from the truth that I almost laughed out loud. He had taken reality and turned it inside out and cast himself as the victim of the whole thing. I told Naomi about the rumors at our next meeting. She leaned back in her chair and said that Gerald was building a narrative to protect himself and his son from the social consequences of what they'd done. And then she said it was actually helpful to us, in a legal sense, because it demonstrated his ongoing pattern of manipulation and dishonesty. Then she said something that made my stomach drop. She told me I needed to start documenting everything, and that we needed to get written, signed statements from everyone who had been at that family dinner, before memories faded or people started changing their stories to match Gerald's. She asked if there was anyone in the Whitmore family who might be willing to tell the truth. I thought immediately of Claire, Daniel's younger sister, who had sat at that dinner table with a horrified, sick expression on her face and said absolutely nothing. Claire was 6 years younger than Daniel, and she had always seemed seemed deeply uncomfortable under her father's controlling thumb, always a little bit like she was holding her breath around him. She and I had always gotten along well, before everything fell apart. I hadn't spoken to her since the night I left, but Naomi said it was worth trying. I texted Claire that evening, asking if we could talk, and she responded within the hour, saying yes and suggesting we meet for coffee the next day. We met at a small cafe near her apartment, and she looked nervous the moment she sat down across from me, both her hands wrapped tight around her coffee cup, her eyes not quite meeting mine at first. I asked her directly whether she remembered what her father had said at that dinner, and whether she would be willing to write down what she'd witnessed. Claire's eyes filled with tears almost instantly. She said she had been feeling absolutely sick about not speaking up that night. She said she had been horrified by what her father demanded, and disgusted by the way Daniel had just sat there frozen, but that she had been too scared to say a single word. Her father, she said, had a way of punishing any family member who defied him, and she still lived in the same city, and still had to see them all at holidays. But what he did, she said, wiping her eyes, was wrong. It was evil, and I can't just let him rewrite it and get away with it. She agreed to give a full written statement about everything she had witnessed that night. She described Gerald taking the ultrasound photos out of my hands and dropping them in the trash. She wrote down his exact words: "Abort it before you curse our family with a defective child." She documented her mother nodding along in agreement, and Daniel saying his father had a point. Her statement was detailed and specific and damning, and she signed it in front of a notary the following week. Naomi told me it would be crucial evidence, proof from inside the family itself, that Gerald had demanded I abort my baby. At 24 weeks pregnant, I was sitting at my mother's kitchen table one afternoon when I felt the baby kick strongly for the very first time. It wasn't the little flutters I'd been feeling for weeks. It was a real solid thump against the inside of my belly that made me gasp out loud. Mom looked up from chopping vegetables at the counter and asked what was wrong. I pressed my hand flat against my belly and felt another kick, and I started to cry. Mom dropped her knife and came around the table and put her own hand next to mine on my stomach, and she waited, and then her eyes went wide when she felt the baby move under her palm. She started crying too and pulled me into a tight hug and told me she remembered exactly what it felt like when she was pregnant with me and felt me kick for the first time, how it was the moment everything became real, the moment she truly understood there was a whole person growing inside her. Dad came home from work about an hour later and found the two of us still sitting at the kitchen table with our hands on my belly. Mom made him put his hand there too, and the three of us waited quietly until the baby kicked again, and Dad's whole weathered face lit up like a boy's. He started talking to my stomach in this soft, low, gentle voice, welcoming his grandchild into the world, promising to teach the baby how to fish and how to change a tire and how to do all the things he'd once taught me. I sat there between both my parents, overwhelmed, and realized that my daughter was going to know this exact kind of love from the very first moment she was born. She would never once experience Gerald's coldness or Daniel's weakness, because I had made the choice to carry her out of that house and away from all of it before she ever drew a single breath. Around 26 weeks, I started having panic attacks about the birth itself. I would wake up at 3 in the morning with my heart racing and my chest tight, imagining Gerald somehow finding a way to show up at the hospital, picturing him pushing past security, or Daniel bringing him despite the restraining order and all its consequences. The fear got so bad that I started avoiding thinking about the delivery at all, which Dr. Brooks told me was not healthy. During one of our sessions, she helped me sit down and create a detailed birth plan that included specific hospital security protocols. We wrote down exactly who was allowed in the delivery room, and we made a separate list of the people who were absolutely, under no circumstances, permitted anywhere near me. Dr. Brooks suggested I meet with a hospital social worker to talk through my concerns and set up formal protections. I scheduled that meeting the following week and explained the entire situation to a kind, unflappable woman who took careful notes and promised to flag my file in the system. Dr. Sharma coordinated with hospital security to add alerts so that anyone from the Whitmore family attempting to access the maternity ward would immediately trigger a response. Having those concrete plans in place eased some of the anxiety, even though I still had the occasional nightmare about Gerald's cold face appearing in the delivery room doorway. Eli called me one evening, breathless and bursting with pride, to tell me he had signed himself up for a class on infant CPR and baby safety at the community center. He wanted to be a helpful uncle, he said, and to know how to take proper care of his niece. I felt my throat tighten and ache listening to him talk about learning how to support a newborn's head and how to recognize choking hazards. His dedication, his pure and total excitement about becoming an uncle made me deeply ashamed that I had ever, even for a second, absorbed any of Gerald's poison about what people with Down syndrome were capable of. Eli was going to be a better uncle than Daniel would ever be a father, and it wasn't even close. He finished the class 3 weeks later and showed me his certificate with enormous, beaming pride. He'd scored perfectly on the final test, and the instructor had written him a note complimenting his careful attention to every detail. Watching my brother demonstrate proper infant CPR technique on a practice doll in my parents' living room, narrating each careful step in his gentle voice, I understood with total clarity that Gerald's entire worldview was built on nothing but ignorance and hate. Eli was capable and loving and endlessly excited to help raise my daughter, while Daniel couldn't even commit to showing up for a supervised visit. The divorce was finalized when I was 28 weeks pregnant. Naomi called to tell me the judge had signed off on all the terms, including the child support amount she had negotiated up considerably from Daniel's initial insulting offer, and the supervised visitation requirements. Daniel would have to complete parenting classes and an anger management course before he'd be allowed any unsupervised time with the baby at all. The settlement included an ironclad clause stating that Gerald could never have contact with my child without my explicit written permission. "It's done," Naomi told me. "You are legally free of Daniel Whitmore." I sat in my childhood bedroom after I hung up the phone and put my hand on my belly and felt the baby move, and I thought about how my daughter would grow up knowing her parents were divorced before she was even born, but that she would also grow up completely surrounded by people who loved her without a single condition attached. That seemed to me like a more than fair trade. Gerald tried to interfere one last time, 2 weeks later. Dr. Sharma's office called me sounding concerned and said that a man claiming to be my father had contacted them, asking about my test results and my due date. The receptionist had been suspicious because the voice on the phone didn't match my listed emergency contact, and because the questions felt off and probing. She had refused to give out any information at all and had reported the attempted privacy violation to Dr. Sharma, who immediately called me. I knew, without a shred of doubt, that it was Gerald. He was still trying to get information about my pregnancy, still trying to exert some threat of control over me and my baby. Dr. Sharma filed a formal complaint with the medical board and reported the attempted records breach to the authorities. Naomi used the incident to file for a permanent restraining order. one that would extend to protect my child after birth as well. We went before the judge 3 days later with a thick stack of documentation of Gerald's escalating pattern of harassment, the trespassing, the certified letter, and now the attempted medical records breach. The judge granted the permanent restraining order and sternly warned Gerald that any contact whatsoever with me or my child would result in his immediate arrest and jail time. Gerald's lawyer tried to argue that his client was simply a concerned grandfather. The judge cut him off. Concerned grandfathers, the judge said flatly, do not violate restraining orders and impersonate a woman's father to steal her private medical records. I found a small apartment just 2 blocks from my parents' house and signed the lease that same week. Dad showed up on moving day with his truck and 3 guys from my prenatal class, including Owen, who by then had become a genuine, steady friend. We carried boxes up 2 flights of stairs and assembled furniture, while Mom parked me on the couch with strict orders to rest and do nothing. Owen struggled comically with the crib instructions, holding the diagram upside down, and the 2 of us laughed until our sides hurt about how neither of us had ever expected to be doing any of this without our partners. The apartment was modest, with worn beige carpet and a kitchen so small you could barely turn around in it, but it was mine, and nobody on earth could tell me what to do inside it. I painted the nursery walls a soft, warm yellow and hung green curtains my mother had sewn by hand, making a peaceful little space that felt like the exact opposite of the cold, museum-like perfection Gerald would have demanded. Dad installed extra locks on the front door and a peephole, practical little safety measures that made me feel protected and watched over. By the end of moving day, I was completely exhausted but deeply, quietly satisfied, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes and by people who actually, genuinely cared about me and my baby. At my 30-week appointment, Dr. Sharma's expression got serious when she checked my blood pressure. She took it 3 separate times and then told me the numbers were higher than she liked and that I needed to come back in 2 days for monitoring. The stress of the past several months had finally caught up with my body. She put me on modified bed rest, which meant no work and minimal activity, just resting and doing everything I could to keep my blood pressure down. Mom took time off from her job at the library to stay with me during the days, making me healthy meals and timing my blood pressure readings every few hours. Owen dropped off dinners his sister had cooked, understanding without my ever having to say it that what I needed most was practical help, not advice. Eli came over after every single shift at the grocery store and settled in to watch movies with me and keep me company, bringing snacks and telling me long, funny stories about his day. His presence was more calming than he could ever know during a time when I was anxious about every small change in my body. We watched comedies together and he laughed at every joke, and his joy was so infectious that it distracted me completely from worrying about preeclampsia and early labor. Dr. Sharma monitored me closely over the next 2 weeks, and slowly, my blood pressure came back down to safer levels, proving that rest and support and love actually worked. My phone buzzed one afternoon with a text from a number I didn't recognize, and I almost ignored it entirely until I saw Daniel's name in the message. He had gotten himself a brand new number to get around my blocks, and he was texting to tell me that his father was hurt, that I was being cruel and vindictive by keeping his grandchild away from the family. The sheer audacity of him still defending Gerald after everything that man had done made my hands shake with anger. I took a screenshot of the message for Naomi, and then I blocked the new number too. I was genuinely amazed that Daniel still could not understand that his father's behavior had earned every single consequence that had come to him. Gerald had demanded I abort my baby. He had called my family defective. He had violated a restraining order. He had tried to illegally access my private medical records. And Daniel's total inability to hold his own father accountable for any of it told me everything I would ever need to know about why our marriage had really failed. He had chosen his father over me and over our child, again and again and again. And now he was genuinely surprised that I didn't want that man anywhere near my daughter. I sent the screenshot to Naomi with a note about the contact, and she wrote back that she would document it as continued harassment. Daniel was never going to understand, and I was finally completely done trying to make him see reality. Owen called me a few days later, sounding nervous, and asked if I wanted to come to his baby shower, which his sister was throwing for him. I hadn't expected an invitation, since we'd only known each other a few months, but he said I had become one of his closest friends, and he really wanted me there. His sister lived in a nice house across town, and when I arrived with my mother, the place was already full of Owen's family members, who welcomed me warmly, like I belonged there. His sister hugged me and introduced me around to everyone, explaining that I was Owen's friend from the prenatal class who understood exactly what he was going through. She pulled me aside later, while we were eating cake, and told me she was so glad Owen had found someone who really got it. Someone who knew what it felt like to be preparing for a baby all alone after a marriage had fallen apart. She gave me her phone number and told me to call anytime I needed anything at all, whether it was advice or just someone to talk to. The kindness of these near strangers hit me hard. After so many months of nothing but cruelty from my husband's family, Owen's whole family asked about my due date and my plans and seemed genuinely, warmly interested, treating me with real respect. I watched Owen open his gifts and laugh with his relatives, and I felt so grateful that I had found this friendship exactly when I needed it most. Mom and I started a childbirth education class at the hospital, where she was going to be my birth partner, since Daniel had abandoned that role along with every other one. We practiced breathing techniques together on yoga mats, while the instructor walked us through different labor positions. Mom held my hand and counted my breaths with me, patient and steady through every single exercise. During one of the breaks, she told me stories about being pregnant with me, how Dad had panicked and driven way too fast to the hospital, how she'd labored for 18 long hours before I finally arrived. She promised me she would be there for every single moment of my labor, holding my hand and supporting me in whatever way I needed. The instructor praised Mom for being such an attentive, natural birth partner, and I realized, sitting there on that yoga mat, that I was not actually doing this alone at all. Even though Daniel had left, I had my mother's steady, unshakable love, which was worth infinitely more than a husband who couldn't stand up to his own father. Other couples in the class had partners who looked nervous or checked out or uncomfortable, but Mom was calm and confident and completely ready to help me through whatever was coming. At 34 weeks, Dr. Sharma did an ultrasound and confirmed that the baby was head down and in perfect position for delivery. Everything looked wonderful for a normal birth. She reviewed my whole birth plan and added detailed notes to my chart about the security concerns regarding the Whitmore family, flagging my file so that hospital security would be immediately notified if anyone from that family tried to access the maternity ward. The hospital social worker came in afterward to meet with me again and go over my rights as a patient and all the protocols they had in place to protect people from unwanted visitors. She explained that I could have a security guard stationed right outside my room during labor and delivery if I wanted one, and that absolutely no one would be given any information whatsoever about me or my baby without my explicit permission. They had dealt with family situations like mine before, she assured me, and they took patient safety extremely seriously. I signed forms authorizing only specific people to visit me and to receive any information. A short list that included my parents, Eli, and a few close friends, and absolutely no one from the Whitmore family. Knowing that the hospital had my back made me feel genuinely safe about the actual birth for the first time. Around then, Claire reached out to me through a long private message on social media, saying that she had cut off contact with her father entirely over how he had treated me. She apologized again for not speaking up at that terrible family dinner, and said she simply couldn't stay silent anymore about her father's cruelty. She asked, very tentatively, if she might be able to be part of the baby's life someday, acknowledging that she would completely understand if I said no, but hoping I might at least consider it. I read her message 3 times, trying to decide whether she was genuine or whether this was some new scheme of Gerald's. I wrote back carefully, saying that we could revisit the conversation after the baby was born, once I'd had a chance to see whether she actually maintained her boundaries with her father over time. I told her I appreciated the apology, but that I needed to see consistent action before I could trust her around my daughter. She wrote back thanking me for even considering it and promising she was serious about standing up to Gerald from now on. Eli surprised me by organizing a baby shower, with help from my parents and my aunt. I walked into my parents' house one Sunday, thinking we were just having our usual dinner, and found the whole living room full of people and decorations. Owen was there with his sister. Friends from my prenatal class had come. Even Naomi's paralegal showed up with a beautifully wrapped gift. The house was full of people who actually loved and supported me, gathered together to celebrate my daughter's coming arrival with genuine, uncomplicated joy. Eli had made a banner himself that read, "Welcome baby girl," in big, careful, hand-drawn letters, and he had organized little games and laid out all the food. Everyone brought gifts and shared advice and stories and treated me like family, even the people who barely knew me. I thought standing there about the kind of shower Gerald and Diane would have thrown if things had been different, how it would have been cold and formal and entirely about them, about their expectations, about their vision of the perfect grandchild who would carry on the perfect name. This celebration was the exact opposite. It was about welcoming my daughter into the world exactly as she was, surrounded by people who would love her no matter what. I cried happy tears when Eli stood up and gave a little speech about how excited he was to be an uncle, and promised the whole room he was going to teach his niece everything he knew. At 36 weeks, I had everything ready, and I was just waiting for labor to begin. The nursery was complete, the crib assembled, all the tiny clothes washed and folded neatly in the dresser drawers. I'd packed my hospital bag, installed the car seat, and read every baby care book I could get my hands on. My body felt enormous and uncomfortable. My back ached constantly, and I could no longer sleep well no matter how I arranged the pillows. But underneath all the physical discomfort, there was a strange, deep, unfamiliar sense of peace. I had built an entire life that did not include Daniel or his toxic family, and I was surrounded by people who were going to love my daughter for exactly who she turned out to be. At my last therapy session before the birth, Dr. Brooks pointed out how much I had grown from the devastated, broken woman who had first walked into her office months earlier. Back then, I had been shattered by Daniel's betrayal and terrified of becoming a single mother. Now I was calm and confident in my choices, and genuinely excited to meet my daughter, supported by people who actually cared about me. I had walked out of a marriage that was destroying me, and I had built something better in its place. I woke up at 3 in the morning to a pain that squeezed my entire belly tight, like someone was wringing out a towel from the inside. This was not the practice contractions I'd been having for weeks. This was the real thing, and my daughter was coming. I grabbed my phone and called Mom, trying to keep my voice steady even as my hands shook. She answered on the very first ring, like she'd been sleeping with the phone in her hand waiting for exactly this call, and told me she'd be there in 10 minutes and to start timing the contractions. I could hear Dad's voice in the background already, saying he was calling the hospital to let them know we were on our way. The contractions were already 5 minutes apart and lasting almost a full minute each, which meant things were moving fast. I grabbed the hospital bag I'd packed weeks earlier and sat on the edge of my bed, breathing through another wave of pain that made my whole body go rigid. Mom arrived and helped me down to the car, her arm wrapped tight around my waist as another contraction hit me halfway down the stairs. She drove carefully but quickly through the empty, dark dawn streets while I gripped the door handle and tried to remember every breathing technique from class. Dad had already called ahead, so when we pulled up to the emergency entrance, a nurse was standing there waiting with a wheelchair. They took me straight up to labor and delivery, bypassing all the normal check-in procedures. The nurse at the desk confirmed that my name had been removed from the public patient directory and that security had already been notified about the restraining order against the Whitmore family. They had flagged my files, she said, so that anyone trying to get information about me or to visit me would be stopped immediately. Knowing those protections were firmly in place, I let myself finally focus on what was happening. They got me into a delivery room and checked my progress and confirmed I was already 6 centimeters dilated. This baby was definitely coming today. The contractions kept coming harder and closer together, each one feeling like it might split me clean in half. Mom held my hand and coached my breathing exactly the way we had practiced it, her steady, calm presence keeping me grounded every time the pain threatened to sweep me away completely. She wiped my forehead with a cool, damp cloth and reminded me to relax between the waves, her voice low and reassuring. The whole morning passed in a blur of pain and breathing, and my mother's voice guiding me through each contraction. Owen texted after Mom sent him an update, saying he was rooting for me and couldn't wait to meet the baby. Eli sent a voice message that made me cry right through a contraction, his excited voice saying over and over that he couldn't wait to be an uncle and to meet his niece. The labor and delivery nurse was kind and endlessly professional, and she never once asked where my husband was or made me feel like less of anything for being there without a partner. She treated me with complete respect and dignity, checking on me regularly and explaining everything that was happening as it happened. By early afternoon, the contractions were coming so fast that I could barely catch my breath in between them, the pain so intense I couldn't think about anything else in the world. Mom stayed right beside me the entire time, never leaving once, even when I squeezed her hand so hard I was sure I'd bruised it. The nurse checked me again and said it was time to push and helped me into position while Mom supported my shoulders. I pushed through contraction after contraction, more exhausted and in more pain than I had ever been in my entire life, but absolutely determined to meet my daughter. And after what felt like forever, but was really about an hour of pushing, I felt a sudden, enormous release of pressure. And then I heard the single most beautiful sound I had ever heard in my life. My baby's cry filled the whole room, and the nurse lifted her up, this tiny, perfect, furious little person, and placed her directly on my chest, and the entire world stopped turning. Every single thing I had been through, all the pain and the betrayal and the fear, all of it simply vanished the moment I looked down at her face. She had a full head of dark hair plastered to her head and my exact nose, and she was, without question, absolutely perfect. Mom was crying and taking photos, her hands shaking so hard she could barely hold the phone. I named her Ivy, after my grandmother, the woman who had taught me what unconditional love actually looked like. 7 pounds, 1 ounce, 20 inches long, and completely, perfectly healthy. She was everything Gerald had sworn, to my face, that she could never be. Dr. Sharma came to check on us a few hours later and examined Ivy thoroughly, explaining everything she was checking as she went. She confirmed that Ivy had excellent ABORT scores and no signs of any genetic condition whatsoever. She made a deliberate point of noting in the chart that the baby showed none of the characteristics Gerald had insisted on. Normal muscle tone, normal facial features, normal reflexes, creating official medical documentation that proved his prejudice had been baseless from the very start. She wrote detailed notes about everything Gerald had sworn would be wrong, and every single thing was exactly, perfectly right. I felt a wave of fierce satisfaction knowing there was now official, permanent proof on paper that he had been wrong about all of it. Dr. Sharma smiled at me and said Ivy was one of the healthiest newborns she'd seen in months, alert and strong and absolutely perfect. But mostly I just lay there overwhelmed with love for my daughter, this tiny person who was depending on me for everything, counting her fingers and her toes over and over, unable to stop touching her soft skin. My phone buzzed on the tray table with Daniel's number.